Greetings, mortals. It is I, Remortis, coming at you with another build guide to Baldur's Gate 3. This time on the ultimate good guy, the ultimate hero that Faerun ever needed. I bring you the Blade of Frontier. Get out of here, Will. No, go, get. The Virtuoso of Virtue, the Protector of the People, the Selfless Sword, the Paladin Bard multiclass, combining the guile and charm of the Bard with the honor and integrity of the Paladin. We shall protect our allies, our friends, and anyone who cannot defend themselves. I guess in a way, you could call this the Harper build. We'll go over each class and what it has to bring to the build, their synergies, a leveling guide, items to look out for, as well as general tips for this playstyle. But fear not, there will be timestamps below to skip to what is relevant to you. Let's get on with it, shall we? Before we get into the thick of it, I'll quickly go over what makes the build work, so you can get the information up front, and we'll go more in depth afterwards. The core of the build is essentially 6 levels of Sword Bard and 2 levels of Oath of Ancients Paladin. Alternatively, you could run 3 levels of Bard and 5 in Paladin if you prefer. But either way, the Sword's Bard will grant us inspirations, flourishes, which are some fancy attacks that can push foes, increase our AC, or hit multiple enemies at once. We also get Song of Rest for extra short rests and out-of-combat healing, and Ancients Paladin will grant us a very solid 2-turn AoE healing pulse that can be used once per short rest. We'll also get Smites, and depending if you advance further into Paladin, a solid spell list as well. Ideally, you'll be fighting with a one-hander and shield, being a support character that can deal some solid burst damage in combination with your flourishes. For example, Slashing Flourish will let you attack 2 enemies at once, and you can smite on both of those targets as well. And well, that's the build. A character with high charisma can be relatively tanky, while dishing out some solid damage and heals with a bit of supporting to boot. If you'd like to see more builds like these, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the next one. Alright, now let's get into the details of the build. The Bard is all about freedom and expression. They can use their inspirations to inspire allies, granting a bonus to attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws. Sword Bard in particular gets access to special flourish attacks that uses and adds your inspiration die to damage. Mobile Flourish will let you push an enemy away, and you can teleport to their new location afterwards. Defensive Flourish increases your AC until your next turn. And Sweeping Flourish will strike 2 enemies. These can all be used at range 2, by the way, which can make for some interesting attack combinations, such as using a ranged Mobile Flourish to push an enemy from further away and teleporting right next to them, and then use a bonus action to shove them even further. Or you can use Defensive Flourish to increase your AC to help maintain a concentration spell. Or my favorite use for the build, with Sweeping Flourish to unleash smites on 2 foes. The other reason to choose Bard is that they have the best dialogue options in the entire game, hands down. Meanwhile, the Ancients Paladin gives us a moral code to live by, to be kind, bringing light into the darkness, and bringing hope in this evil world. It also provides us with a pretty sweet Channel Oath feature, Healing Radiance, which will heal allies in a small radius when it is cast, initially, and at the beginning of your next turn, equal to your Charisma modifier, your proficiency, and your Paladin level. So, for example, if we are the core build of 6 Bard and 2 Paladin, with an 18 in Charisma, we'll heal for a total of 9 hit points on each pulse. And at our second level of Paladin, we'll get another fighting style. I'd recommend Defense or a flat 1 AC bonus, or even Protection for more of that hero vibe. We'll also gain Divine Sense, which we can use to gain advantage on attack rolls against Celestials, Fiends, and Undead for a couple turns. But more importantly, we'll get the ability to Smite. So if you need some bursts here and there, you can dish it out. If you decide to go more levels in the Paladin, Oath of Ancients has access to some really great spells, such as Moonbeam and Misty Step, and Speak with Animals too. But we'll go over the different level variations for the build in a moment. But before we do that, let's go over the stats. Since we're going to be the ultimate good guy or gal, we will not be giving the mercy to the hag, and thus we will not be using her hair to gain that early +1 to any stat. Therefore, we'll be using a 16 in Charisma, and we can opt for a 16 in Dexterity as well, leaving us with enough points to increase our Constitution to 14, breaking even on Intelligence, Charisma, and ignoring our Strength. We could also increase our wisdom by 2 for a few more saves by lowering our con to 12, and you can use that extra stat point into strength to increase our carry weight slightly. Strength is the only stat that will receive benefits on odd increases. Although we can get by with only 14 dexterity, since the majority of medium armor in the game only allows a maximum of +2 AC from our dexterity. Although there are plenty of medium armors that have uncapped dexterity. And we can run a spread of 10 strength, 14 dexterity, 14 con, 10 intelligence, 14 wisdom, and 16 charisma. So again, run whichever stat variation you'd like. Now on to level variations. So the core build is 6 Swords Bards and 2 Oath of Ancients Paladin. At 5 Bard, our inspiration die will increase from a 1d6 to a 1d8, and they can be restored on short rests. 6 levels of Bard will grant us our extra attack through the Swords Bard subclass. You could get extra attack from 5 levels in Paladin as well if you desire, and run 3 or 4 levels of Bard instead. This will also let you get Speak with Animals and the Snaring Strike at level 3, and Moonbeam and Misty Step at level 5, as well as a bit more HP to boot. You could also slap on a few levels of Warlock for Pact of the Blade and some evocations, with some endgame builds looking like 6 Swords Bards, 3 Ancients Paladins, and 3 levels of Warlock, or 4 Swords, 5 Ancients, and 3 Warlock. Or if you don't want any trace of evil at all, 5 Bard, 5 Paladin, and 2 levels of Fighter for Action Surge could be an option too. Or 5 Bard, 7 Paladin, or vice versa. Having more Paladin will grant you the Paladin auras to give you an upwards of +5 or +6 bonus to all saves and resistance to all magical damage through the Oath of Ancients aura. While more Bard levels means up to 4th level spells, and a spell slot spread of 4 first level, 3 second level, 3 third level, and 3 fourth level, and 1 5th level spell slot. So pick whichever you prefer. Both have their pros and cons. As for origin options, I suppose you could run Will with this build if you want to be a Bard Paladin, but move over, Will, this is Tav's show here today.
Or Redemption Urge, which is probably one of the better narratives in the game in my opinion.
And as for our race, pick whatever you'd like here. I personally like the idea of being a gnome because gnome bards make me chuckle, and some deep gnomes have some interesting dialogues in the game. But there are plenty of races that will give this playstyle some pretty sweet perks. So pick whatever you'd like in the end. It doesn't really matter all that much. But if you want to be the prettiest, obviously go half elf. So now that we have the various options, let's get into the level by level guide. Starting at level 1, you can choose Bard or Paladin. Pick Paladin if you prefer to have the ability to wear heavy armor, but for me, I like starting with Bard first, and I don't really care about heavy armor. With spells, pick Vicious Mockery and Friends as our cantrips. Vicious Mockery is perhaps one of the funniest cantrips in the game, and can be useful against hard-hitting enemies to inflict disadvantage on them. For first level spells, I like to grab Thunder Wave, Healing Word, Heroism, and Longstrider. Fairy Fighter and Featherfall are also good choices. For starting skills, Persuasion, Sleight of Hand, and Performance are my go-tos. Although I could argue if Performance isn't necessary and you can go with Stealth instead. But it just feels wrong being a Bard without Performance. At player level 2, I like to pick our Paladin level here. We'll get that Healing Pulse Aura, and more importantly, I like to get our Paladin dialogue options available early. You can hold off on the Paladin levels if you want to get your extra attack quicker, but for me, it's not that important. But we'll get it eventually. At level 3, we'll continue in Bard until we get our extra attack. When we hit level 3 Bard, however, we'll pick up Swords Bard as our subclass with the dueling fighting style. Although you could go for 2-weapon fighting style and dual wield, but we'll need some special blades to make it really work. I'll go over that later. As for spells, there are a lot of good choices here. Cloud of Daggers can deal some reliable damage throughout the turns, especially if you can keep your enemies inside of it. Otherwise, Invisibility can be useful for out-of-combat applications too. Shatter can be nice for some quick AoE, and there are plenty of decent single-target crowd control options here, such as Hold Person and Heat Metal. As for feats, there aren't too many feats that are must-haves for this build. So honestly, going with ability score increase may be the better option. Either pump up your dexterity or charisma. Either option is good here. With various weapons, I can benefit from having high dexterity or charisma. We'll go over that in a moment though. Otherwise, Warcaster and Mobile would be solid feats to choose. At player level 5, you can opt to grab another Paladin level here to get your Smites online. In tandem with your Sweeping Flourish, it can deal some solid damage against 2 targets, to make up for the lack of extra attack. Otherwise, continue in Bard. When you reach level 5 in Bard, our inspirations come back on short rest, and we'll get level 3 spells. Honestly, my favorite here is Glyph of Warding, due to how incredibly versatile it is for both damage and crowd control. Otherwise, Hypnotic Pattern can be pretty solid too. And at player level 8, we'll have our Bard 6 and 2 levels in Paladin, our 3 Bard and 5 Paladin. Now we have our extra attack, our flourishes, and our smites, and we can do some solid work here. And from here, you can advance more into Bard, Paladin, or even throw a Warlock or Fighter into the mix. Dealer's choice. If you do decide to go to Bard 7, freedom of movement, confusion, and greater invisibility can be some decent spell choices. And now let's get into the items. As mentioned before, we'll most likely be wielding a one-handed weapon and a shield while wearing medium armor. You can use heavy armor if you'd like, by starting with the level of Paladin first, but that's up to you. Personally, I think there are more interesting medium armors in the game, such as one of my favorites for the build, the Yuan-Ti Scale Mail, which we can obtain at Last Light End in Act 2. That uncaps your dexterity modifier, allows us to use stealth without disadvantage, and gets us a +1 to our initiative rolls. As for weapons, there are a lot of interesting choices to go for. If you don't want to dip into Warlock, but still use your Charisma for your attacks, there is the Infernal Rapier by fulfilling a quest late into Act 2 for Will, as well as Jaheira's Sylvan Scimitar, about the same time you get the Rapier. Jaheira's Scimitar can also be used as a solid option to add our Charisma bonus if we're trying to dual wield as well by using this in your offhand. Although you can't wield the Rapier and the Scimitar at the same time without the dual wielding feat, so keep that in mind. Valar Luve in Act 1 is a very thematic finesse weapon to have, utilizing either Shriek or Sing to benefit your party as you see fit. It's probably one of the best weapons in the game in my opinion. The Thornblade is one of my recent discoveries sold by Damon in Act 2, which adds additional poison damage to your attacks while you're concentrating, which I find to be fairly thematic for our build, considering we'll be concentrating quite a lot, on a variety of spells such as Blast Divine Favor, Cloud of Daggers, or a crowd control spell. I love to pair Thornblade with the Strange Conduit Ring for more bonus damage while we're concentrating. And you actually can dual wield these too if you decide to go with the Dexterity build. You just have to rest like once or twice to have Damon replenish his stock, or level up. It's a weird mechanic. Anyways, there are plenty of solid shield options in the game too, but one of my favorites you can get rather early is the Sentinel Shield, which will grant you a +3 to initiative and advantage to your perception checks, sold by the Bugbear at Moonrise Towers. And of course there are plenty of other great shields in the game too. When it comes to range options, a common strategy for bards is to dual wield hand crossbows, which is quite formidable. However, there is a longbow in the game that you can get very early as soon as you get into the druid camp that'll let you restore a spell slot whenever you critically strike with it. Although this spell slot's only level 1, it still can be a decent option to help get out another healing word off in between rests. Otherwise, hand crossbows are just fine. For gloves, Hellrider's Pride, sold by Zevlor, grants the Blade Ward cantrip to anyone healed by you, which means they'll get resistance to any physical damage. Pretty sweet, especially in combination with our Healing Radiance, so you can heal your whole party and they all get resistance to everything. There's also a great pair of gloves in Grimforge, held by a Mimic, that grants an additional +1 to AC and also gives you an additional inspiration charge. Headwear, the Cap of Curing can be found by an off-key bard in the Druid Grove that lets our inspirations also heal target. For boots, there's a couple nice options in Act 2. The Evasive Shoes sold by Mattis at Last Light Inn grant an additional +1 to AC and Acrobatics. Or the Boots of Brilliance can be found in a temple by a Cranky Demon in Act 2. That lets you restore your bardic inspiration charges. For rings, the Strange Conduit Ring, as mentioned before, is a nice option to have for bonus damage while you're concentrating on spells. In Act 1, there's also a ring called the Whispering Promise, which grants anyone you heal the effects of Bless. Anyhow, I could go on and on about items, so for the interest of time, there are plenty of great items throughout the game, especially at the end game. But we'll wrap up here, otherwise, like I said, we'll be here forever. I hope you enjoyed this build, and if you'd like to see other guides like this, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. Or you can tell me how wrong I am and explain how you build your Bardadin, or Bardlockadin, or whatever you'd like to call it. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Farewell for now.